That's right. So, as you know, the priority of the administration was stopping the bleeding on the education side. So that's basically keeping education flat and rebalancing within Proposition 98.
Okay. Very good. Any questions on this first trailer bill, AB 94?
Is this file item 5, SB 69 is what we're doing, or which are you looking at?
AB 94. Do you have this list?
I have the list, but we're jumped to the second one.
Yeah, we're not taking up the budget bill, just taking up the trailer bills.
All right, got it.
You've got seniority.
You didn't want to say your own.
Nice. Sorry, buddy.
Sorry for that interruption, Mr. Cohn. So with no questions from committee members on AB 94, we'll establish a first vote count and then we'll move forward. So if you could call the roll, please.
Leno?
Aye.
Huff?
No.
Alquist?
Aye.
Anderson?
Aye. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I was reading 94.
Yeah, don't do that.
No.
Anderson, no. DeSaulnay?
Aye.
DeSaulnay, aye. Emerson?
No.
Emerson, no. Evans? Evans, aye. Fuller?
No.
Fuller, no. Hancock? Hancock, aye. LaMalfa?
No.
LaMalfa, no. Liu? Lowenthal?
Aye.
Rubio?
Aye.
Semidian? Aye. Semidian, aye. Wolk?
Aye.
Wolk, aye. Wright?
Aye.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 ayes. 5 noes.
Thank you. And the measure passes to the floor. The next measure we're taking is AB 95, which is the resources omnibus trailer bill.
This one achieves budget savings in the resources area, principally Department of Food and Agriculture and the state parks.
Very good. Any questions, members? Yes, Senator Evans.
Could you address the issue of immunity to state parks upon closure, partial closure, or reduction in services?
Sure. As you know, the budget is putting forward a plan to save $11 million in parks in the current in the budget year, $22 million after that, and the trailer bill lays out the criteria for that those closures. What the immunity language does is basically ensure that the state doesn't end up up with additional costs as a result of this plan, that if we do close a park and someone goes into that park, even though it's clearly marked closed, that the state would not be financially liable for anything that happens to someone who is trespassing at that point.
Of course, you feel free to comment as you like.
Well, I just I wanted to note it and maybe bookmark it because I do have some concerns about how broadly the language is written.
Thank you, Senator Evans. Any other questions about this AB 95? I want to be respectful of everybody. Also, I guess we're not in a big hurry, so let's call the roll.
Leno?
Aye.
Leno, aye. Huff?
No.
Huff, no. Alquist?
Aye.
Alquist, aye. Anderson?
No.
Anderson, no. DeSaulnay?
Aye.
DeSaulnay, aye. Emerson?
No.
Emerson, no. Evans? Evans, aye. Fuller?
No.
Fuller, no. Hancock? Hancock, aye. LaMalfa? LaMalfa, no. Lou? Lou, aye. Lowenthal? Lowenthal, aye. Rubio?
Aye.
Rubio, aye. Semidian?
Aye.
Semidian, aye. Wolk? Wolk, aye. Wright? 11-5. Bill passes.
So, colleagues, that is our full vote, 11-5. So for future votes, if there's any change in that, let me know. Otherwise, we'll go with the previous vote count. So moving on to AB 96, which is the Human Services Omnibus General Bill. I'm sorry, Senator Wright.
But this point of information, I'm late. I was looking through 95, the Santa Susana Mountain thing. I don't see it, so it was amended
That was
out of.
amended out. Thank you for pointing that out.
Thank you.
Indeed. Moving on to the Human Services Trailer Bill, which is AB 96.
This bill achieves almost $2 billion in savings, principally in the CalWorks, IHSS, and SSI SSP programs.
And this is representative of about $6 billion in budget solutions. Is that correct?
That number, I think, is high. I've got about $2 billion.
Health and Human Services together.
Yes.
Yes.
So health is the next one on the list, AB 97. So AB 96 is
96. Do we have a dollar amount on that?
about $2 billion.
$2 billion. Okay. Any questions, colleagues, on this one? Yes, Senator Huff.
Yeah, I figure an explanation is probably in order. We believe there's a couple $100 million of what we like to term phony cuts in here, and it's certainly less than what the governor had scored earlier. We have concerns about that, but we'll reserve our debate for the full floor.
Very good. Yes, Senator Evans.
Thank you. And I'm not sure if I should have brought this issue up in under AB 95 or if it's in this bill. Excuse me, not 95, 94, or if it's addressed in this bill. But the cuts to child care centers, given what the conference committee did, it's essentially, well, it's a total of a 25% cut. And the information I have is that many of the centers throughout the state will not be able to survive that large of a cut. So I wanted to raise that issue. I personally would prefer to see restoring the 10%.
Thank you, Senator Evans.
10% of the 25%.
Right. We did reduce the number of slots available, including preschool, which was by about 15%. And there's about, Mr. Cohn, correct me, about $267 million in savings there.
That's right.
And then additionally, which was not something we did with any pleasure whatsoever, in fact, recognizing that this is going to be a hardship, and again, just underscoring to all of our colleagues here that this is going to severely impact the provision of child care in many of our communities. And this second additional impact to which Senator Evans is referring is the reduction of license-exempt provider rates from 80% to 60%, which saves another $44 million. And the two together, I would not argue, are indeed onerous.
If I may just add to that, Mr. Chair, it's not just, the pain does not just stop with the child care centers or the children or the parents. This makes it more difficult for people to hold down jobs, and it makes it much more difficult for employers in our local community to find people that can fill their jobs. So it's not just a matter of human services, it is a matter of employment as well.
Right. And I forgot also to mention, which there's also the reduction in funding for, Mr. Cohn, if you could help remind us some details about what the Title V contracts are. I understand these are the older
these are
child
the
care providers?
Right. There's two standards, Title V and Title 22, and they both have their own sort of systems in place, and so both are being hit in the budget proposal. And that's this is a 10% reduction in their rate to the Title V centers.
Thank you. And Senator Evans, your points are very well taken. So without objection, we'll hold to the 11-5 vote. Very good. We're going to pass over AB 97, which is the health trailer bill, for just a few moments as we complete the rest of the agenda, only because we are awaiting an amendment to arrive so that we can take action on it. So moving on to AB 98, which is the developmental services trailer bill.
Yes, the developmental services trailer bill will reduce costs in that department by about $560 million through standardization of services across the centers, increased federal funds, and continuation of a provider rate reduction.
And whereas we found some savings in some other areas that the governor had, we reduced the level in the statewide purchase of service standards, with the governor proposed around $424 million in reductions. We restored that to only $174 million, and this is for the purchase of services, so to keep the pain as far away from the clients as possible. Any questions on this one? Yes, Senator Evans.
Thank you. I just, again, want to bookmark an issue that we may need to be addressed, and that is with respect to the language that creates new liens on behalf of the Department of Developmental Services in cases where a consumer has filed a lawsuit for wrongful death or some kind of a tort against a third-party tortfeasor. And this is a whole new animal that's being created by this trailer bill language. I would have thought it would be consistent with what we do in Medi-Cal liens. The language is not consistent with it. It's somewhat broad and undefined. So speaking as a practitioner myself, I think it's going to be very difficult to apply. So I want to bring that up as an issue and something I think we're probably going to have to look at cleaning up as we go along.
So bookmarked. Thank you. Senator Huff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Although this bill does reflect about $375 million in general fund budget solutions, it also rejects $224 million in spending reductions. But more problematic for us is that it focuses those reductions on community services rather than on the overhead and bureaucracy, and we find that problematic. So we will be voting no.
Very good. And Mr. Cohn may remember an interaction that we had the last day of the conference committee where we pushed back on the administration and told them that they had to find greater savings in administration, and that was the action of the conference committee. So again, without objection, we'll go with the 11-5 vote. Thank you. Next bill is AB 99, which is the Proposition 10 trailer bill.
That's right. You'll recall the governor's budget had proposed to put Proposition 10 on the ballot to ask voters to make a change. This version restricts the savings in Proposition 10 to a one-time savings of $1 billion in the budget year, and we're comfortable with that. And by using Proposition 10's two-thirds provision that allows the legislature to amend a proposition by two-thirds vote, we feel this furthers its purpose by being able to protect over the long term services for children 0 through 5.
Right, and as you mentioned, this is a one-time action, and different from the governor's original proposal in January. This does not in any way impact the ongoing funding for Prop 10. I think the suggestion was to take 50% in the ongoing years, and we're not doing that. So it's just the one-time taking of the $1 billion. So again, without objection. Oh, Senator Huff?
Yeah, quick comment. So it does score $1 billion in one-time general fund savings, but it rejects over $200 million in ongoing savings. But probably the most problematic thing is that to amend a voter-approved proposition without a vote, as you're proposing to do here, is risky, and any risk in the budget solution introduces risk that may be unacceptable, and certainly not able to score in a timely manner.
Mr. Cohen, do you have a response?
Sure. Obviously, most of the solutions in the budget package carry some level of risk, and lawsuits are certainly a possibility here, but the proponents of Proposition 10 have stated that they view this as a reasonable compromise in terms of generating one-time savings but not making ongoing changes to the program.
Senator Huff.
If I recall, the governor talked about taking any tax increase to the people or extension, and are you saying the governor does not want them to have a similar voice on this thing, on redirecting these monies?
Our goal in terms of the June special election is to make as simple and clear a choice for the voters as possible. So one measure is desirable. Certainly, we had no problem with going to the voters and making our case here, but particularly on a one-time solution that the proposition allows the legislature to make that amendment. We don't feel the need to go that route for those one-time solutions. Certainly, if you were kind of making an ongoing change to this program,
I'll take that as a lengthy, legally at risk no.
I apologize for the length.
But I think the point Mr. Cohen is making is that your legal foundation, the administration's legal foundation for taking this action, is that there is clarity in the Proposition 10 wording that the voters approved that allows for this one-time use of the money.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I will underscore that I've also spoken with the original proponents of Prop 10, and they are very happy with the compromise. Senator Huff.
Yeah, just one final clarification. When this was in conference committee, we supported the cuts. That's not an issue here. I don't want anybody to start messaging that the Republicans are unwilling to do the cuts. We're talking about the methodology here. We think it puts it at risk in putting it two-thirds, and so we don't support it at this point because of that.
So noted. So again, without objection, the vote will be 11-5. AB 100 is the Proposition 63 trailer bill.
This discussion, very similar, using language within Proposition 63 with a two-thirds vote of each house of the legislature to make amendments to it on a one-time basis, redirect revenues to help the state pay for its Medi-Cal program. $861 million is the budgetary solution from this proposal.
And very specifically using this money for 3 mental health programs.
That's right.
Right.
So it's still consistent with the overall intent of Proposition 63.
And the original force behind Prop 63, of course, was Senator Steinberg, who has endorsed this as well. Comments, questions? Otherwise, we'll go with the 11-5 vote. AB 101 is the redevelopment trailer bill.
This bill achieves the governor's budget solution of $1.7 billion by ending redevelopment agencies, but allowing the transition by paying off all existing obligations so that basically we ramp down over time on a one-time basis, $1.7 billion helps the general fund. Going forward, the intent here is to put money back into the hands of local governments, schools, cities, counties, and special districts so that they can decide what their core services are and direct those dollars, about $2 billion annually, to whatever their governing bodies decide.
Senator Huff.
I've expressed our concern about this repeatedly. You have scored $1.7 billion, but the association that monitors their members say that that is a fictional number at best, that probably $200 million can be realized, so this is yet another hole in the governor's budget. There have been several compromises that have boiled down to a couple that have, I'll call it an 80% theme, that would create a win-win situation that I called for in conference committee that could extend the life of project areas, score real money for the governor's budget, and take care of some of the other concerns and issue some reform. And this is problematic because it is still the same problem we were tripping over before, that it will be sued, it will be litigated initially, and the more risk you introduce into this budget, the more we're kicking the can down the road, which is exactly opposite what the governor said he intended to do with this budget.
Senator Huff, I appreciate the time and energy you put into finding some alternative here, but we kept running into constitutional problems. First of all, of course, with Prop 22, but in your proposal to extend the life of and then to bond against, we run into a Prop 58 problem, which specifically prohibits the legislature from closing its budget by further borrowing, which I believe that's what you're proposing.
That's actually not the plan. The plan is voluntary, and by voluntary, the attorneys believe we have no problem with either Prop 22 or 58. And while there's two different versions, one calls for securitization, the other does not, we will go with the least problematic. And I'll be happy to discuss that with you later.
Okay. So I think the telling word here was your legal counsel believes, and our legal counsel believes as well. So if ours has risk, yours would have risk, and
Less risk.
that's to be determined. So what I do want to point out, because clearly this has been a very debated issue over the past couple of weeks and months, and I don't think any of us here or in the entire legislature did not hear from our redevelopment agencies, and rightfully so, defending a certain way of doing business. The governor's point being that the general fund could not continue to afford to backfill that property tax amount that was being redirected from education, and that was the reason for this. What we did, working with the administration, succeed in adding to the proposal was for successor agencies, which will be the cities that originally formed the RDAs, will have bonding authority to continue to complete those projects which are midstream right now, so that we wouldn't lose all those public investments in projects that are either a quarter, half, three-quarter of the way through. And to determine where a project is, the successor agency, the city, will be able to make the determination with review by an oversight board that has been created, a 7-member board, and then finally with sign-off from the director of finance, the controller, and the treasurer. So there's a whole process here for anyone to make the case that a project is midstream and should have bonding authority to complete that project.
Can I say something quick?
Senator Huff.
And part of the problematic part of that is, as I understand it, that bonding authority would come with the presumed reduction in threshold to a 55%, similar to school bonds, as opposed to the current 2/3 for other types of bonds?
No, the governor's been clear in making a suggestion that he'd like to go to the ballot in 2012, but this is not dependent upon that.
Let me just say again, although this has been well debated, but currently when redevelopment is creating jobs, building things out of something that's not there now and creating that increment, they're doing so in a way with a board that's accountable to the public. The presumed way of doing it with the bonding authority takes selling this project to a community and developing consensus that way to float bonds to do the economic development, which is very problematic at best. Although it's a mechanism that is not going to function, in my estimation, as well as what we have now. And it's just another part of that, the whole fear that what we are doing, as well as with the enterprise zones, not up right now, but we are taking a couple of the items that are creating jobs, that are doing something in spite of a lingering recession, and we're killing that and saying, trust us, we'll come up with something later on that will backfill it, and I just don't believe the mechanism is there.
Sure. I don't think that Palm Desert Golf Course was in your district, right? That was another senator's. Okay. So again, without objection, we'll go with the 11-5. Senator Wright, you're voting no. Okay. So we are 10-6-9-7. Moving on, we are at AB 102, which is the Judicial and Public Safety Bill.
This trailer bill allows savings to be scored in the courts, some measures to help them achieve $200 million in savings, the Department of Justice and the Office of Inspector General. In the Office of Inspector General, it's reclassifying some positions as non-safety.
And that came out of a report from the Pro Tem's office showing some abuse there. And also, just to underscore, this is the non-realignment public safety trailer bill. Questions? Without objection, are we 11-5 again? I think so. All right. AB 103 is revenue and taxation.
This measure will increase general fund revenues by $2.3 billion by the end of 2011-12. Two policy issues. One is the single sales factor, going to a mandatory single sales factor so that multi-state businesses won't be able to choose the type of tax formula they want to use to submit their taxes to the state. The second provision, the one that Senator Huff just referenced, the elimination of enterprise zones. The single sales brings in about $1.4 billion, enterprise zones just over $900 million.
Very good. Questions, comments? Senator Huff.
Yeah, I've already talked about the enterprise zones, but the single sales factor, while it actually might have some merit on a policy issue, is something that was engaged in budget negotiations just recently that resulted in the political demise of several of my colleagues. And it's that type of thing that strikes at the core of our institutional partisan distrust. Because when Republicans are asked to cast these very difficult votes, and they're able to get some consideration for that, and then those considerations are overturned at the next drop of the hat, there comes a point where there's just no desire to come to that collegial concurrence if there's no staying for even, a year or two. I'm just saying. And this single sales factor is right at that issue.
I appreciate the comment, Senator Huff. I would just suggest that it is to our credit if we can collectively recognize that we, and you made reference to the positive public policy aspects of this, that if we can collectively realize we made a bad decision, and we've got a tax policy now that encourages corporations to hire and accumulate property outside the state of California. That's not good public policy.
Actually, I didn't state that. I said there may be policy considerations there.
Very good. So noted. Senator Anderson.
I think I could add a little clarity to it. It's not about the policy. It's about the nature of the product. How can we move forward when next year we're going to be told that whatever is negotiated this year and whatever is good for what we believe is good is no longer valid, in that we made a mistake next year. And every year we run the risk of next year is a mistake, and then we have to face our constituents who said, look, we like the idea only if these considerations are in place. So it's more of how do we move forward when everything's so fluid and there's nothing to hold on to. I think that may have been closer to Bob's point. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Senator Smithian.
This is a legitimate topic for debate, in my opinion, but I've sat here quietly through a half dozen bills where we had billions of dollars in savings and great pain to the state of California, where my colleagues who've been telling me that they wanted us to face up to hard cuts have refused to vote for hard cuts. I think a little less in the way of positioning and a little more in the way of action to find common ground and compromise would serve our constituents, without regard to party and without regard to location, somewhat better.
Senator Huff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With all due respect, I voted for more cuts than any of the Democrats up in this aisle in conference committee. And these are not cuts to state government. Let me say that again. You are cutting local government. With redevelopment, you're cutting local government, not state programs. And you're backfilling state programs with these funds. So not only is that disingenuous to call these cuts and call me out for not doing something that is deceitful, is an affront to my position here. I have taken all of the governor's cuts, and I would challenge you to do the same.
Senator Hoff, I'm going to call on Senator Evans to make a brief comment first.
Yeah, I don't want to go a lot further into
Senator
this
Evans, go
topic,
ahead.
except that I do want to say I think this is a worthwhile discussion to have, as difficult as it is, and as sensitive as it is. I do appreciate people saying what is on their mind about it. It's kind of the elephant in the room here. And I would, sorry, don't want to be partisan about the images. It is the 400-pound gorilla in the room, shall I say. But just like a dysfunctional family, you know, sometimes that gorilla needs to be trotted out and looked at and examined and discussed. So I do, as difficult and sensitive as it is to have that conversation, I think it is worth at least having a bit of it. And I think actually we ought to have more of it in private, if not during our public discussions. But the point I wanted to bring up is that I think we're all trying to struggle in a very difficult situation, in a very dysfunctional system that even allows or requires this kind of price to be paid, shall I say, for a vote. And that also, when that vote is cast for very responsible reasons, penalizes the person who casts it. So that's just my way of saying I'm grateful for the discussion, but I think we're all in a position where we're all having to give something, and it's very, very hard for all of us.
Thank you, Senator Evans. It certainly is difficult for all of us. I do not believe this to be deceitful in any way. We know now more than we did when we passed this in the dark of night without public debate. That was the situation. So, Senator Anderson, if there are things that we are doing this year, I don't think they're similar to the way this got passed. This did not have committee hearings. This was done at a very late hour, and we've come to understand it better now that it does not advantage California corporations who are doing their hiring within the state. Beyond that, when we did pass this, it was before the entire international financial community fell to its knees. So we are in a very desperate situation right now. At the time that we did take action on single sales factor some years ago, the LAO is projecting that we would, due to inflation and population growth, have $125 billion in our general fund this year. The governor's proposal is closer to $85 billion. So it's a very different world, and suggests that any action we take today can't be revisited by a legislature 2 or 3 years from now due to change in conditions is just a false assumption.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I think you make some excellent points. Although it's only 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I think that we are voting on these in the dark. And while most of it's been vetted in committee, I haven't read these. Maybe some of my colleagues are speed readers and they've read them, but I think that we're still voting in the dark, no matter whether it's in the afternoon or in the morning. Clearly, we haven't fully vetted this because, I mean, if everyone's read it, then raise their hand. I mean, I don't want to call people out, but it is very similar to what we had before in that sense.
Senator Wright.
You know, I am prepared to vote for the measure. There are a couple of things. I reject the notion of how it's characterized as to what it makes corporations do. Clearly, that was written by somebody who's never been in business. They functioned as a tax person, but they've never been in business. Every time you change one of the dynamics, I could submit to you that changing this back will simply cause a corporation to alter their strategy the other way, and you might end up with not only losing the job, but you'll lose some of the sales as well because they'll find an alternate way to deliver it. What you've changed is the strategy by which they play. It doesn't mean that you necessarily pick up another dollar. Moreover, I know of several companies in the next 2 years that are in my district that will leave my district because we're taking away the enterprise zone. So once again, before you start scoring the money, you might get it this year because they won't be able to leave in calendar year 2011. But by calendar year 2012, they'll be gone. So the assumption that is made often by the tax collector is that the business community is static. My experience in 25 years in government is that they're virtually always wrong. Whether it be cigarette taxes or the other, they usually end up where the money doesn't materialize because the public or the corporation responds in a way that advantages them around paying what this is. So we ain't going to get the money. I think most of the enterprise zone will prove to be illegal. And I think that whether we did it in the dead of night and we didn't pay attention or however we did it, when you give your word to someone and they make a business decision based on that, and then you can capriciously say, I made a mistake last year and I changed my mind this year, it doesn't bode well for your ability going forward when you make promises to business about what you'll do. So I get it. I don't like it, but it's not as simple as saying we did it in the dead. And I mean, I knew exactly what I did. I studied single sales factor. It's based on 3 formulas. It forces you to have to make considerations as to how you invest. You pick the one that is clearly most advantageous to you, but it assumes that you're growing the business all the while. So the person in franchise tax who wrote that, in my opinion, has never been in business, and they've only been on one side of that debacle.
Thank you, Senator Wright. I'm glad you're voting for this today. With regard to the debate on single sales factor, I believe it's only the state of Missouri that does it the way we're currently doing it. No other state does, yeah. And with regard to enterprise zones, I was amazed to learn that San Francisco corporations benefit from it more than I think any other city. But nonetheless, when I came to learn that 83% of all enterprise zone benefit goes to corporations with assets over $100 million, and that for businesses with assets of less than $1 million, it totals 1.3%. This is hardly benefiting small businesses, and that's one of my concerns.
Never the only intended purpose of an enterprise.
Well, that's been successful because it doesn't benefit small business at all.
I mean, I'll take in Compton a Fortune 500 company that was not going to locate here. If I get a small business, I'm happy to get that too. But I'll take a Fortune 500 company that locates in Compton because I gave them an enterprise zone.
Right. But the question then, is it worth $900 million a year to the state? So that's the question. Okay. But I'm glad to have your vote on this. Senator Huff.
Yes. Actually, the single sales factor was adopted in the February 2009 budget, so it was not, a legislative analyst was not predicting a $125 billion general fund at that time. It was probably more along the lines of 105 or less. Yeah. But more importantly, it was a part of the agreement that, in the belief of Republicans, that to raise taxes in a recession was detrimental to the economy. And so the offset of that was something that would help the economy, help business, help jobs, and that was the single sales factor. So that is why it was tied to the taxes. And yet another component of this, the COP, cost of performance, was negotiated just last fall. And certainly our assumptions have not changed that much since last fall. But it still goes back to the other issue that my colleague, Senator Anderson, tried to articulate, that if the minority is working to come to a bipartisan agreement and then the majority changes it because they can the following year, it doesn't foster that kind of cooperation across the aisle that, at least in the past, has been necessary. I recognize majority vote budget is with you now, but indeed you are still looking for our help on things, and we would love to have some certainty of things, not just for our own negotiation, but for the businesses as articulated by Senator Wright.
So without objection, we will go with the 11-5 vote on AB 103. AB 104 is General Government's trailer bill.
There's an assortment of issues in here. All told, they would reduce the budget deficit by over $100 million.
Senator Wolk.
Yeah, I'd like to ask the administration, Mr. Cohen, I wanted to talk about the Williamson Act for a moment. I understand that the issue of the subvention, which was removed, but what also has been done is you have struck the language that enabled the alternative program, which is not a cost to the state, to move forward, and that affects badly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 counties, and probably a dozen or more that are considering this alternative, this policy alternative that was proposed. Can you give me some insight as to why the administration has proposed that change?
Sure. The proposal was really tied to the $10 million augmentation in last year's budget, sort of viewing it as an entire package, that language came at the same time with the $10 million. So our primary consideration was the dollars, and just sort of viewing the thing as being linked with those dollars.
It seems to me that the policy could be delinked from the $10 million and still move forward and allow the counties to move on their own and at their own expense to preserve the program in a different way, which is what they've tried to do. So I would ask you to take a close look at that so that the decoupling could take place. I understand that, but with the retention of the policy.
Sure, we're happy to have those discussions.
Senator Wolk, you make good points, and I just want to be mindful that we'll have an opportunity in the spring months to revisit this issue as well as many others to fine-tune and rethink and reconsider as necessary. Without objection, I believe we are going to then be 10-5 with Senator Rubio abstaining. 10-6, I'm sorry. No, I think 10-5-1. Abstention?
No.
Oh, you're no?
Yes. I would like this.
Okay, very good. 10-6. Very good. So as I mentioned earlier, we're still waiting on an amendment for AB 105. We'll move on to AB 106, cash management's trailer bill.
Sure. So the cash management trailer bill follows basically what we have in place this year to help the state continue to pay its bills, and that comes with, unfortunately, some deferrals of payments to local governments, but they're in distinct time blocks, and we're able to turn them off with the controller and the treasurer if the cash situation ends up being better than expected.
Any questions, folks? 11-5. AB 107 is statewide. We're not taking that up now. AB 108, the budgetary loans and transfers.
Yes, this bill includes just over $500 million in current year loans, and the primary reason for the dollar amount here is in walking away from the sale-leaseback of state buildings. The administration basically made a judgment call that the borrowing rate of the sale-leaseback at about 10% was not a good financial decision, and replacing with another one-time solution, in this case borrowing from special funds at a much lower interest rate, about half of 1%.
I certainly agree with you there. Without digressing too much, any comments on outstanding concerns relative to, there's now been mention of some sort of legal challenge to that?
We feel like we're on solid ground. The contractor hadn't met all of their obligations under the tentative deal, but ultimately the conclusion of this was at the governor's discretion, and we feel like we're on very solid ground.
Glad to hear that. So without objection, 11-5.
On TV 108.
On 108. Okay. Correct. AB 109 is the public safety realignment trailer bill.
That's right. This trailer bill goes along with the constitutional amendment to return more public safety authority to the local level in terms of low-level offenders, post-release supervision, state parole, the Division of Juvenile Justice, making various changes to implement the governor's realignment package.
Clearly, there is much devil in the details here, and I just want to note that the administration has worked very successfully with a lot of the stakeholders, and I believe that there is, dare I say, universal support at this time. There's no major opposition.
I think no major opposition would be fair. I wouldn't want to.
No, I don't want to be presumptuous. I want to respect all
but we have certainly the changes that we made in February were reflective of conversations with the counties and the various public safety community. We, at the get-go, we said we were interested in a collaborative process, and we do feel like this product reflects those conversations.
Right. And clearly, this is also a significantly different proposal than which you had put forward in January. And as we discussed in conference committee, when this realignment is fully implemented by 2014, we'll see a $38,000 reduction in our state prison population, which is the goal that we had been directed to aspire to by the federal court. So we will be succeeding in that, as well as, and as a result, if we take a $25,000 per year savings cost for each inmate, the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation's budget will be reduced by $2 billion by 2014, fully implemented, which is a great accomplishment on all of our parts, because that's a department that we know continues to grow, and that the savings will be to the general fund, because the funding for this realignment, of course, we hope to see on the June ballot, and that's where that funding would come from. Senator Wolk.
Just briefly, Mr. Chair, the three bills, 109, 111, and the constitutional amendment, together make up the realignment package, which accounts for, I believe, close to $6 billion in savings, which is is more than 20% of what is facing us this year. But I think that there are two things I wanted to say. The first is that this is a budget significance, certainly, but it's also more than that. It's going to be a different way of doing business, which by realigning services to the local level, we hope that the end result will be better value, better outcomes for the very people who are receiving the services. The second thing I wanted to add is that we really can't speak enough about, positively enough, about the process by which this is in front of us. The counties came forward early on, worked hand in hand with the administration and with the legislature to make of this proposal, these proposals, positive outcomes. And I think that that's something we really need to emphasize. We're not finished. There will be implementation, but the counties have shown, and the other, all the constituents that work within the counties, I mean the sheriffs, public safety, the health, human services, all of this really worked well together and should be congratulated for that. So hopefully at the end of the day, this is better government and better results for the folks that are served. Thanks.
I concur with all your comments. Thank you. Senator LaMotha.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have to point out 663 pages is this document, and the amount of time that we're making such giant policy changes, and without, I represent 12 counties, and I don't have buy-in from 12 counties and out of the 58 at this point here. This is such huge policy change, and I would love to have the opportunity to work this on a more protracted timeline here to make the kinds of change that maybe local government can make more efficiencies, but this is really kind of a scary way of doing business on such an important policy change for our state. And I wish we could slow it down and do it a little more correctly.
Mr. Chair?
Senator Anderson, go right ahead.
Well, I have gone through a cursory look at this and going through it in a deeper level, and And the concerns I have is that it limits or eliminates probation for child beaters, drug dealers, and gang members. And it would be much more palatable if the committee would consider adding an amendment to allow all Californians to carry concealed weapons, since we're going to be fending for ourselves.
Thank you for your comments, Senator Anderson. I would take objection with your assessment of the trailer bill, as I think Senator Cohn would as well. Mr. Cohn, if you wanted to respond, I don't think that's quite an accurate statement.
No. In terms of supervision, there is a transfer of supervision from the state to counties, but there will continue to be post-release supervision. In addition, we were expecting the counties to enhance the levels of services provided to former incarcerated folks, so that we're expecting better outcomes rather than worse outcomes.
And what we're in fact doing is giving the local authorities flexibility to use evidence-based successful programs to lower crime rates by keeping former offenders successful in their probation and parole periods, which will mean less cost to the state, safer communities, and using best practices, whereas currently whenever anyone trips up, we send them back to state prison at close to $50,000 a year. It's unsustainable. We've seen the percentage of general fund that we're spending on corrections double from 5 to 10% in just the 8 years that I've been here. So this is long in coming, and I would underscore Senator Wolk's comments. This has been a long process with stakeholders, and Senator Lamalfa, I hear your frustration, but at the same time, this has been a work in progress for many, many, many months now, and anyone who's had an interest in this could have followed every detail of it. Senator Hancock.
Yeah, that was honestly the point that I wanted to make too, Senator Leno. I don't know about other people's constituents, but my constituents were in all the time talking about what they needed to make this work. I think the fact that law enforcement is now pretty uniformly on board, along with the counties, is very, very important. This is going to result in not only saving money, I think, but making safer communities. And it will be a huge step in the right direction in a system that has pretty much been generally agreed to be an expensive failure in California.
Thank you, Senator. Without objection, we'll take a vote for the public safety realignment, AB 109, as an 11-5 vote. Colleagues, I want to backtrack just very quickly. AB 107, I don't know if we need much debate on this. We all know that this is to be debated on the floor, but this is our statewide special election trailer bill. Perfunctorily, we need to move this out of committee and to the floor. So without objection, this will be an 11-5 vote. Moving on and back to AB 110, which is the tax compliance trailer bill.
This includes several measures intended to improve the collection of existing taxes owed, generating over $400 million. The largest piece of that is a limited tax shelter amnesty program that would bring in $270 million of additional revenues.
Any comments, questions from the committee? If not, 11-5, AB 110. AB 111, the Public Safety Facilities Realignment Trailer Bill.
This is really connected to your earlier discussion on AB 109. This is making several changes to the AB 900 program to coincide with a realigned public safety program.
And that would involve an acceleration of the AB 900?
That's correct.
Great. No questions, comments? 11-5, AB 111. So we're going to go back to the health trailer bill now. That was on the first page, AB 97. I believe we have amendments. They're on the way. Mr. Cronin, why don't you begin?
Sure. This is the health trailer bill, and my understanding of the amendments would basically what would be left in this bill relates to generating nearly $2 billion of savings in the Medi-Cal and Healthy Families programs. As you've discussed through all your committees, there's a variety of tools that are being proposed here, additional co-pays, further restrictions on services and so forth, and so estimated $1.7 billion in Medi-Cal and $34 million in Healthy Families.
Colleagues, again, if anyone wants to even suggest that we aren't making real cuts to real people on an ongoing basis, you'll find them in this trailer bill. Very unpleasant cuts. We did proceed with some alternative ideas relative to the governor's original January proposal. For example, we rejected a hard cap of 10 physician or clinic visits for Medi-Cal patients, recognizing that that was just going to be unworkable for those who are on dialysis or just had a heart attack or other life-threatening illnesses. A cap doesn't respect those medical facts, and so we came up with a soft cap, which after 7 visits could be waived with a physician confirmation that the health of the patient is necessary for further visits, and still we were able to score some savings on that. We also did reject the hard cap of 6 prescriptions per month, recognizing that by limiting prescriptions, not only would people get more ill, life would be at risk, but there would be more visits to emergency rooms, that prescriptions keep people healthier, and that was not a wise move to follow. We also took issue with the elimination of the multipurpose senior services program. That was the governor's proposal in January. This is a case management program for Medi-Cal seniors, and the agreement we reached with the Assembly was to take 13% out of it, I believe $2.5 million out of a $19 million program. And then also much debated was the governor's proposal to eliminate adult day health care. And the agreement we reached in conference committee was, whereas the Senate had restored $25 million out of a $176 million program, the Assembly restoring $150 million. We compromised at $85 million. And though not unlike redevelopment for legal reasons, we will have to end adult day health care, but at the same time, we have intent language that states that we will recreate adult day health care with acuity threshold standards so that there can be savings realized. But the idea, as written in the trailer bill itself, it's very clear there should be a seamless transition, that doors not necessarily will close, and that the most in need seniors will continue to benefit from an adult day health care like service. So I think we softened some of the rougher edges of the original proposal and at the same time met the necessary savings target. Any questions? Yes, Senator Huff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We concur with the amendments that have recently been taken. We would note that this is a procedural vote, so we'll still be voting no, but also that about $312 million were not scored that the governor had originally proposed, and as difficult as this is, that still continues to move us further away and further from achieving that half revenues, half cuts.
Just to be clear, this was an amendment Democrats or Republicans had requested?
I said we concurred with the amendments.
Okay. Very good.
The first part.
And any other questions? 11-5. So I believe all we have left now is the transportation trailer bill, and colleagues, so we've completed all of our work with the exception, as mentioned earlier, of the transportation bill. Amendments relative to transportation will also impact AB 94, which is the second item on the first page, the education trailer bill, so we'll need to amend that as well. Those amendments probably won't be ready for 10 or 15 minutes, so I'm going to suggest that we recess for about 20 minutes, reconvene at 2:45 back in 3191 so we can complete our committee work. So we are in recess.